Hi, my name is Christy Wishingrad, and I am currently enrolled in Professor Flores' online epidemiology class. And this is my partner,
Doris Espejo. I am currently enrolled in Professor Bell online epi class, and the study that we selected to review is to explore the link between thyroid disease and pesticide use.
So the study that we researched was published in 2009 in the American Journal of Epidemiology by 5 individuals from the University of Nebraska Medical Center who chose to conduct an agricultural health study. These scientists chose to perform this study because thyroid disease is relatively common, and there is previous evidence of a connection between organochlorine exposure and their relationship to an increase in thyroid disease.
More specifically, the researchers chose to look at the rate of hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism in female spouses in the states of Iowa and North Carolina, whom are enrolled in this particular agricultural health study between the years of 1993 and 1997. Previous studies have shown that those exposed to pesticides have an increased risk of developing thyroid disease, more so than the general public.
So identifying any modifiable risk factors for thyroid disease is really important, given that an estimated 5 to 9% of adults have subclinical thyroid disease, and even 1 to 8% have clinical thyroid disease. Of course, there are multiple non-modifiable risk factors, such as being of the female gender, increasing age, and iodine deficiency. However, due to the evidence of past environmental exposure to pesticides and the correlation to an increase in thyroid disease, this leaves a large opportunity to change for the public health department to educate the community in regards to risks associated with pesticide use, and we can learn new ways to instill more efficient personal protective equipment practices.
In this particular study, researchers involved licensed pesticide applicators and their spouses in the state of Iowa and North Carolina. The applicators applying for certification to use restricted use pesticides in these states were recruited between the years 1993 and 1997. Those who were married were given 2 questionnaires. First one was a spouse enrollment questionnaire, and the second was the female and family health questionnaire, to be completed by their spouse at home. Male applicators and spouses were recontacted for a follow-up telephone interview 5 years after the enrollment of the study.
So in the first phase of the study, spouses indicated their overall pesticide exposure by reporting the years lived or the years worked on a farm, or if they ever personally mixed or applied any pesticide during their lifetime, or the total years of personally mixing and applying pesticides. However, this exposure information didn't account for secondhand pesticide exposure for the spouse. Furthermore, demographics, smoking history, agricultural activity, and reproductive health and medical history were also taken into account.
During phase 2 of this study, the interview process was completed and detailed information of the spouse's medical history was obtained through a self-reported history of physician-diagnosed thyroid disease. The analysis was limited to female spouses of private male applicators who completed both phase 1 and phase 2 of the research study.
As far as the results from the study, out of the 23,560 female spouses, 16,529 women supplied information that was suggestive of pesticide-related thyroid disease. Ultimately, a prevalence of self-reported clinical thyroid disease in female spouses of pesticide applicators is 12.5% higher than in the general population. We found that the results of the study are consistent with the researchers' hypothesis in that organochlorine chloridane was associated with hypothyroidism, and even though not all of the associations were statistically significant, the remainder of the organochlorines in which there are 50, were all associated with an elevated odds of developing hypothyroidism.
For the researchers of this study, they would like to conduct further studies and suggest focusing on determining whether pesticide exposure is also a risk for thyroid disease in male pesticide applicators, as well as evaluating the mechanism of action. A possible suggestion for a future study would be not to only look at the male pesticide applicators' risk of developing thyroid disease, but also looking into other family members' exposure, perhaps immune-compromised individuals that live in the same household. That includes children, elderly, or even pets for that matter.
One obvious strength that we found in this study was that the researchers obtained a large sample size. They had over 23,000 participants. Another strength was that the study was able to identify certain pesticides that were strongly associated with an increased odds of thyroid disease.
However, this study did have some limitations. One of them was the researchers slowly relied on the participants' self-reported diagnosis of thyroid disease. Furthermore, a small amount of the participants reported to having yes to both hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. Although it is possible for individuals to have both in such cases of thyroiditis or treatment with radiation, the researchers didn't have enough information to determine the exact nature of their disease. So these individuals were placed in the other category. The researchers also didn't have access to the participants' medical history and records, making verification of the reports impossible. Another limitation of the study is that researchers didn't have information on timing or level of exposure of the pesticides, and these are huge variables that can affect the results of this study.
When I did my initial investigation for a research article related to public health and epidemiology for this assignment, I chose to search keywords such as pesticides, chemicals, and even pediatrics. Any type of keyword that was under that general umbrella. I really wanted to look into this topic on a personal level because my husband owns a pesticide company and he is the main pesticide applicator. Although he is very careful with limiting his own exposure to any of the pesticides and chemicals that he uses, he's also really diligent about preventing bringing any of the particles home. But the potential of spreading it by means of secondhand exposure is still a constant concern for our family, especially since we have a 3-year-old. So for me, I found this topic particularly interesting due to those reasons. And I thought that the article was also really well written. It was easy to understand. It had a lot of numerical information, but I found it all easy to understand and decipher.
So for me, what I found interesting about this study was the topic, which has become a hot topic as of late, is the correlation between environmental toxins and diseases. And in this particular case, hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism about 10 years ago, so it interests me to see the link between my disease and environmental toxins that might have perhaps caused it. As also a vegetarian, a majority of my meals are plant-based, so I make it a point to buy as much produce organically as I could, either from the market or farmer's market, just because of the health risks that I've seen in studies correlating between diseases and pesticides.
And that completes the review of our research study on pesticide use and secondhand exposure and how it does relate to an increased odds of developing hypothyroidism.